Hello and welcome to this IBTV spotlight on our recent roundtable with BCAR, focused on the network of networks of, the blood industry as we look at it today. Chetan, actually, to kick us off, as we've not long wrapped up this roundtable, it literally happened this morning, could you talk to me a little bit about where the idea of the network of networks has come from?
Sure. Thank you, Georgie. I think BCAR, which stands for Blood and Cell Advocacy Roster, is a group of like-minded organizations from industry, from foundations, from the blood centers, as well as policy and industry groups to continue to help us to increase the patient access to cell and therapy, blood and cell therapies, right? The idea of network of networks, I think, first came from Kevin, who had talked a little bit about how things are set up in the US. And as we mulled over it some more, we've got every one of the hospitals, the blood centers, the industry, all of them trying to work towards this patient access for blood and cell. And it seemed like, wow, there's all these networks that people engage with, and maybe that's what we should bring together. So I think that's where it came from. We're also talking about bridging the chasm between, blood centers and the therapy providers and how that can all work. And it was a very interesting roundtable this morning.
Fabulous, thank you. Kevin, do you have any further insight on that, what that network of networks looks like?
Yeah, I think so, because if you talk about an elephant, if you were only looking at one part of it, you would describe it very differently. So the Emily Whitehead Foundation has a very specific focus on the patient and how they interact with healthcare and access to care, right? And while we're all committed to that, we see that slightly different. So access to Vitalentor for blood centers is about being in the community and providing maybe cell therapy collections or last mile support, right? Where ABB, the way they're looking at it is about standardization and a venue where the stakeholders can come together and agree to how we're going to do things. Because if you said early on, it's about standardization and make sure that that if he says he wants that somebody needs a leukopak, I know what that means, and you know how to collect it, and it's the same all across. Then, of course, Terumo at the very end, you supply the technology and the way to create not only today, but in the future. And so instead of saying Terumo has to do it all, or Emily Whitehead has to do it all, or ABB, we just use the existing networks and put them together.
Fabulous, thank you. Thinking back to the discussion, so we started with a focus on the patient pathway, discussing the blood industry's expertise in vascular access and apheresis, of course. But based on this experience, and really based on the discussion, what specific actions were discussed that blood centers perhaps can take immediately to enhance their support, more specifically for autologous therapies?
I think the conversation takes a step back, and that's sort of how we addressed it today at the roundtable, is when the pharmaceutical company comes in, to them it's a new idea, it's a new landscape. But from the hospital and the blood center point of view, we've been providing biologic support to the hospitals for decades, right? AABB has been around for 80 years, and while initial blood collection may have been done at the hospitals, they quickly understood that the manufacturing guidance, the CFR FDA registration, the GMP was not something that most hospitals, some, but not all hospitals could do. So it's like, oh, can somebody just focus on that in the institution? So ABB came together, like-minded institutions, to provide a nationwide advocacy and support group to supply biological therapeutics. Now, most of that has been blood and red cells and platelets, but it's also overtimed in lab support like HLA, like clinical apheresis, things like that, where a large hospital could do it themselves, but maybe in a smaller community, one hospital didn't have enough, a big enough patient cohort to do it, to develop that service themselves. But one entity, an agnostic entity, it's not that works with all of those hospitals, there would be a large enough patient population that they could provide those services so the patients could stay in their community. So we kind of started there saying, hey, it's already there. You just have to tweak your concept about that slightly, and you'll already see the infrastructure.
There are a lot of things that the blood centers are already good at, right? They know how to handle blood and cell products, right? Second, they have the relationships with the hospitals, whether it's community or large scale. Three, they have the medical expertise because they already have physicians and nurses. They have obviously technology from companies like us. And when you start looking at all the facets that go into the development and administering of a therapy, you find that there are so many pieces that people have to look at. And one of the great things about this roundtable was identifying what are those various facets and which ones might the blood centers be really good at, right? Because not everyone can do everything. And that's part of the reason why this network of networks is useful, because you will get collaboration between all the different interested parties, with the patient being at the center of it all. How do you make sure that they can access these treatments? So I think that was a really good insight, whether it was systems, whether it was payers, whether it was policy, whether it was technology, whether it was standardization. So this could go in so many directions, and we probably have to prioritize which ones we're going to work with first, second, and third.
I think if we think about the expertise required to manage this network of networks, based on our discussion, what are some of the priorities within that space for not just expertise and upskilling and things like that, but also education and how that's flowing across these networks? George, I don't know if you want to start.
Yeah, I think one thing from the patient community and from blood banking, it's building community and trust and connection is unique, both from a donor perspective and a patient. A patient and a healthy donor are often very much alike in how we want to engage and be connected, at the granular level with them. But then how do we magnify that to the network side? So if we think about what we're doing here at Facilitate, building boxes to deliver to Dallas Children's, part of it is delivering the hope in that box to the patients, but the network side is the nurse navigator, the social worker that's going to receive the boxes with us. We may not be here when the patient receives it, but building across those networks. I think you can look at it like a neural network and the different nodes you have to connect. We could say that blood banking has that connection, just like the nurse navigator has that connection. There's like a face of healthcare that you actually see. Then sometimes there's your clinician, your doctor who comes in and gives you the numbers. I think that's where we can start. You must have to start at the highest level and the most granular level of building trust. And that's a lot where blood banks, donations, what they've been great at is building that connection to the community. But a lot of these communities are insulated and small. So how do you get communities to grow and share outside of their tribe or community? That's always been a passion of mine. And that's where the network of networks gets a bit difficult. How do you grow beyond this great 10-person group and commit to, okay, we're going to have 10 groups of 10 people now have that same relationship? It can never scale one-to-one, but how do we keep the communication going to build the trust and carry it across?
Jeff, do you have anything to kind of add to that?
Yeah, I mean, so this is another capability we identified this morning during the roundtable, right? So we've talked a lot about blood programs, technical capabilities around apheresis and working with their laboratories, maybe some cell selection, working with quality manufacturing experiences that they can share with the therapy developers. But this idea that in a lot of places around the United States, the blood center is really central to the community where people are living, where these sick patients might be, accessing the blood program's ability to then amplify messaging around referral patterns or being able to support local hospitals as these therapies become commercial. I think that needs to go top on the list of capabilities we want to make sure that the therapy developers are aware that the blood programs have.
To sort of combine two things that you both have said. Obviously, in a large academic institution, you go to the Hopkins and the MD Andersons of the world, they have many cell therapy experts, many blood banking experts, but most of the community, if there is a pathology, and I'm just giving a specific example in a specific department because I'm pathology trained, most hospitals, if they have any pathologist on site, they're anatomic pathologists. They're signing out those cases from surgery. They don't have a consultant for the clinical side. And so for many of the hospitals to get the accreditation, they have to show that you have access to consultation from an anesthesiologist, from pharmacists, from a nutritionist, from a blood banker. And so oftentimes, to both of your points, the blood center physician that's in that area serves as that consultant for the entire, not just for that hospital, but for all the hospitals in that service area.
I think we ran the stats the BCAR group did at the end of last year. It's only like 5% of U.S. hospitals have the robust Rolodex, the capabilities needed to support these patients right now.
It's small. Looking at, like, kind of thinking about these hospitals and also community providers as well, how are collaborations and partnerships operating within this network? And was anything discussed today that maybe could proactively contribute to how we approach these collaborations and partnerships in the future?
We talked a little bit about how some of the major academic centers might be reluctant to give up some of their patients, to lose direct oversight over their patients as they might be being apheresed or preparing to receive this treatment. But then we were reminded that many of these hospitals have strong, long-lasting relationships with the blood programs. We've been providing them with blood products, supporting them through smaller clinical trials, and maybe leveraging those established relationships would allow the clinical sites to be a little bit more open to working with their community blood programs.
I think from my days at leukapheresis collection at Hemocare and others, even just the evolution at Terumo around making the technology more accessible.
Right.
We watched the evolution of the Appia happen, and we touted our nurses' 30 years of experience, but we couldn't let that be the case if cell therapy was going to scale. So there's a technology component that allows that spread into the community that we need all parties from the innovation side to all of the networks. We need to make it easier to deliver and specialize in other ways to connect.
And to just build on that, in addition to obviously the technology, we're beginning to leverage the data itself, and also there's a program called Veda Insights, which allows you to look at all your data and then say, how do I get the best cell based on the mobilization of the donor, and how do you continue to make that more affordable or make sure that the cell, Kevin, to your conversation earlier, if we knew exactly which cell, so we can continue to support those kinds of activities as well, which I think is more and more important, because as more and more cell therapies are developed, you need to dial in on it's almost like a dial a cell program, right?
So I think blood centers, one of the things that is a unique angle with the blood center is everyone is worried about the patient. So we have that down. But who's the donor advocate? So when a donor comes in, and I'm talking specifically when the donor isn't a patient. It's a little easier when the donor is the patient. But when the donor isn't a patient and they come in and they have a marginal hematocrit or they have a marginal platelet count, to your point, analytics are huge, right? You may have an expert who runs the program, but you have a lot of other staff that are doing the day-to-day collections, and they'd be like, oh, how long can I keep this person on the machine?
Right.
And you can't just say, well, we have to collect to goal no matter what, because if you're doing that and not honoring the agency of the donor, you could actually harm the donor. Nobody really wants that. So by having those analytics, I have a very comprehensive Excel spreadsheet that we can say, oh, based on this, they will lose this sort of platelet count for every hour or for every total blood volume. Oh, then we could make it, or maybe we're only getting 80%. So it goes back to communication. So those cases where the initially requested for dose isn't achievable, since we're so committed and focused on that, we can have conversations hours before the patient gets off the machine to begin having a conversation. Hey, is it okay if we only make it to this target, or what's your real target?
Correct.
And adjust there. So I do think communication and analytics
Yes.
are huge in being able to scale, because not everyone needs an 8-hour collection.
No, and that's the whole point is, go back to, you need a particular cell, you have the technology, you have the data analytics that helps you say, great, I mobilize the donor, or, if the donor is the patient, and then we can keep them for the least amount of time on the machine. I think, that is sometimes, to your point, Kevin, not really valued, which should be right on top of the list.
And I think so many clinical programs are driven by the need from the therapeutic developer, and in seeing the growth of blood banks and the data that's there, that connection of being able to predict who might work versus driving from the clinical need, there's a huge part, especially in the allogeneic side with all the blood bank collections. All of that data it's scary to me that we haven't collected it. So I think we can inform, but we need to engage so much earlier.
We've started. I think it needs to continue, obviously.
And kind of sticking with the therapeutic developer relationships there, so we've kind of referenced that you need to engage earlier, but is there anything else missing in that step, or what was kind of raised or discussed today about the significance of those relationships with developers?
In my opinion, number one, the therapeutic developers need to understand that there are lots of resources available to them to get the right starting material. And I think there was another roundtable that discussed some of that as well, not at our session. So number one is just awareness that these are the resources that are available. Sometimes you don't know where to go, or you're like wondering whether I should get something, right? That's number one. With respect to the therapeutic developers. But along that same line, and one of the things that we discussed was, at what point in the treatment cycle should we be collecting the patient cells? Because many times what happens is the cells therapy discussion happens after the other conventional treatments that we already have of chemo and radiation. And by then, if you're trying to collect cells, that becomes a challenging proposition. So I think for everyone to understand two things, they have all these resources available, and maybe one of the things we need to try to work on as a group is, can we collect cells up front so you got the best cells possible before you get down to the therapy development?
I'm going to add a 3.
Yeah.
And it's sort of a corollary of 1 or extension of
Yeah.
1 of the talk. Not everything's IP,
Yes.
right? So I can send chicken to everyone here, and you can cook an amazing dish that's unique.
Yes.
Right? So if a cellular starting material, if we know, go back to what you're saying, this is the cell, this is the dosing minimum, this is the viability minimum, this is the time from the end of collection that we can either need it cryopreserved or shipped fresh, whatever it may be. If we focus on that and understand under a proper quality management system, I may collect it one way, you may collect it another way, as long as we're ABB accredited and factory accredited, whatever that winds up being. Not everything has to be IP, and then it opens up that we can share those analytics. But if everything's closed,
Yes.
and I don't want to show you mine, and you don't want to show me yours, then how are we going to learn across? And ultimately, I think it impacts patient access, because you can't the entire landscape can't innovate and improve.
I want to try and kind of wrap up the conversation a little bit, but I want to just ask you all, really, based on the roundtable today, what do we now see as the most significant barriers that need to be addressed in order to align this blood industry network of networks with CGT? Were there any surprising things that came out of the roundtable discussions that may have adjusted this view for you? Or are you quite happy and comfortable with the challenges as you saw them going into that conversation?
We had originally discussed the last few months making sure that the advanced therapy developers have an awareness of the capabilities of the different blood centers, blood programs across the country. And that's still something that we need to do. That needs to be a priority to make sure that the biopharma is not readdressing problems that the blood programs have already figured out. But what came out of the roundtables today is we also really need to focus on the clinical teams at the hospitals and let them know, hey, we've got these capabilities available. You've been working with us for decades. Let us take your patient. Let us provide the apheresis, so then you can focus on what you need to focus on, which is caring for the really acute patients. And we'll take those who are going after a second, first-line therapy. We'll hand them back for you. You can trust us in the quality of the collected product. You can trust that you'll be able to reach us and let us know if there are any issues. So that was new to me, and I really appreciated that insight.
Yeah, I think, and we've seen the growth and maturity. It was a shame early in my career seeing everybody not knowing what was going to be proprietary and thinking they could differentiate on cryo protocol or cell isolation protocol or collection protocol. But really, we're seeing some of the standardization just around how companies operate and how they engage. So we're getting some of that awareness.
Right.
But I think it's still not, you're evolving as blood banks too. So how do we keep that awareness going? And VCAR can help connect that to the patient outcome piece. But it was really hard 12 years ago when nobody knew what was going to be proprietary. It just works so well for patients that we have to do it. Maybe I can collect the cells the best, and that'll be my win in the CD19 world. I think we're far past that, and we're at that maturation stage.
So at the risk of overextending the analogy of a network of networks, right? if you have a single network, then you have this belief that your arms are going to be big enough to solve all the problems. And many hospitals, many blood centers, many industry have that sort of concept for first order problems, developing national standards, developing technology, bringing the right stakeholders together for advocacy. Those are, and you get success. But at some point, the problem is so complex, your institution by itself or your network itself can't put their arm around all of the problems. And I think it's kind of leveraging a little bit of what you just said. Enough of the larger institutions and hospital systems and others have got to shift slightly and realize, oh, I can't get around it, but if I leverage the other members of the networks, collectively we can do that. And I think it's a little bit of a control issue that we're struggling with right now, but I think more and more people are beginning to realize I can't recreate that. I can't recreate the technology, but I can have those relationships.
Well, maybe we need to do a better job too at forums like Facilitate or the AABB annual meeting, sharing how we've addressed some of these complicated problems, showing the solution, showing that these collaborations work to inspire others. So,
And to the control piece, we all have trouble letting go of things. I like to think I can go learn something new if I get somebody else to do this. And I think even just that mindset is, yes, let's give this up. Something else exciting is going to happen. And I want to have the bandwidth to get that done. Even at the highest level, I preach that. How do we free up the time to go learn the exciting thing so we can get ahead of the next wave?
Well stated, George.
Yeah,
That's good.
I think the biggest learning from today was we need to keep these conversations going and involve all the parties, just like everyone else on the panel has just said. This is second in this line, ABB, Terumo, Vitalant, we did one at ABB last year. This is the second. And I think as you have looked at the multifaceted approach we need to take, it almost is like we need to have obviously the therapy developers involved, but almost create subgroups within BCAR to say, you guys go figure this out, come back and let's all work together, because there is just so much in this continuum, right? Right from the time a patient gets a diagnosis till they get the cure, quote unquote, all of us are actually standing shoulder to shoulder. We are all need to be together and it's not a competition. So I just feel like great start. Thank you, Jeff and Kevin and George for being part of it. But I just feel we need more and more of this education and awareness like you guys talked about. And maybe pick specific places for us to try out what we've discussed here to say, okay, with standards, let's go with one region or with one standard across the country, whatever they may be. So key takeaway, lots of good stuff, but the conversation needs to continue.
I'm going to ask for one final thought, actually. So BCAR is obviously a community that we're building, and it's growing, it's getting bigger. There's lots of conversations planned. We're inviting everybody to join that community and be part of that conversation. But what do you think is going to be the next conversation that we need to be having? How does this discussion move forward for the next roundtable or event, symposium, however we bring that together?
I'll just say that we had a lot of people at the table that were interested in the conversation but didn't speak. And I would say as brilliant as we think we are, right, we don't know the entire landscape. And everyone has a voice. And I think I would love, it's going to, before we integrate on a nationwide standard, it's going to have to be local, and the building of the trust, as you brought out, in relationship building. I would like to see more people realize you really have a voice at this table, and your situation and your relationships matter, and collectively we can build off of that. It's not just because Jeff said it or Terumo said it or whatever. We just have more. We've seen some, but you've seen some too, and come in and have the conversation. And I think if they can get past that, then we could accelerate.
Fabulous. Well, thank you everyone for joining me today and for the roundtable today. But thank you very much.